Hey, thanks for joining us today. Ron Steiger with Arke Systems, and here we got a webinar going today on how to build the engineered customer experience for utilities. And KC's joining us today from Chartwell. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And thanks to everybody who's joined us on the webinar. Certainly hope that you get what you're looking for out of this. We've got time scheduled for questions at the end, but probably about a half an hour of dialogue where KC and I will share some of our experiences and some of our insights that we've got. So, sound good?
Hey, thanks for joining us today. Ron Steiger with Arke Systems, and here we got a webinar.
Okay. Well, to start off with, Casey, why don't you go ahead and share with everybody what you do and what Chartwell does actually for utilities?
Absolutely. So Chartwell is just a little over 20 years old at this point. We work with utilities, gas, electric, and water across North America, and really our focus is on improving the customer experience. So that crosses a lot of different categories, everything from billing and payment, marketing and communications, outage communications, basically anything that has to do with the customer interface. And we do quite a bit of research, both with consumers inside the utility industry and outside the utility industry, to help surface and bring to bear best practices to help utilities better their customer experience.
Awesome.
So Ron, what do you do at Arke Systems, and what do you do for your customers?
Yeah, well, so yeah, thank you. So Arke Systems we're a marketing technology organization. We work with a lot of marketing and communication organizations, helping them to actually digitize the way they're working, interfacing with the world. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, it's as a technology partner, we're simply focused on the infrastructure and the data and the systems and how all those work together, the interconnection of these different, often disparate data sources and systems, so that we can get to a singular view of the customer or of the employee or of the community or whatever happens to be. So we do a lot of work in utilities. We also work in a few of the other standard verticals. We get in healthcare, and we work specifically around a lot of engineering and financial organizations as well.
Great. Well, I'd love to pick your brain on that as we get into this webinar, because I'm sure there's some good best practices. But let's not beat around the bush. I'm curious with how do you actually build a better engineered customer experience for utilities?
Sounds like the topic of the event.
It is.
Well, I'm glad you asked. Certainly our audience will want to know. I think the most important thing, and it seems so obvious, but it's also so often overlooked, is to be able to really identify with why are we here? What are we doing? What is our vision, and what's the strategy that we're going to take across this? That we're building this infrastructure, this customer experience platform. How do we engineer this? We have to understand, beginning with the end in mind, what's going to be success at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the first and most obvious step, but often not seen. Your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk to a lot of utilities that there's what we call shiny object syndrome, right? We're doing it because everyone else is doing it, and having a very clear and well understood end in mind, why you're actually doing something, is so critical for not only building the right thing, but also assessing at the end of the day, did you actually accomplish what you set out to accomplish?
Right. Yeah, having that overarching strategy is definitely something that's just not always on the forefront of what people are thinking. But we are talking about a full onslaught digital transformation here that requires a lot of strategy. And working with someone like Chartwell, gathering those insights, you guys have some great information that anybody that wants to go off and begin to build this customer experience journey, to not have those insights and not to be able to use those in their preparation is just going to put them way behind the starting point.
Yeah.
So
if you're starting as a utility, you say, okay, I want to build a smart strategy. We haven't really done anything around customer experience, at least in an intentional way yet. How do you go about building that strategy? How do you go about building that roadmap? What have you seen there as best practice?
Were you saying building the strategy for the roadmap itself?
Well, I haven't started yet as a utility. What's the first thing that I do? And then what do I do after that?
Well, gathering the insights from Chartwell, getting that vision crafted, making sure you understand really where you want to go on this digital transformation, I think is key. I think the next thing is you have to crawl, right? A lot of people they just want to go right to the end, and well, let's just go ahead and launch the next Amazon.com. We're going to put our utility on it. It's not going to work that way. So you got to crawl, and there's a whole lot to be done in these kind of efforts for many organizations, especially when utilities haven't really embraced the customer engagement like they do. I think they're desiring to now. the minimum viable product identification, being able to identify that MVP is paramount. You've got to be able to do that because there's just way too much to do. You get your executive sponsors on board. You have people behind you supporting you financially, putting the resources in place, and also going to the board and explaining to them what these investments are for. Going to the Public Service Commission or PUC or whichever governing body there is, and I'm explaining to them, here's the money we're going to spend. Here's why we're doing it. You're going to get pieces. That overall budget for what you want to do at the end of the day is not all going to come the first time. So you need to identify what that MVP is with your initial budget and be able to satisfy those executive sponsors and stakeholders so that you can get some quick wins.
And for folks who aren't familiar with it, like, what is a minimum viable product? What does that actually mean? What are you defining there?
Minimum viable product isn't going to be, well, how little can we do of our big project with a certain amount of money, or how little can we do with a certain amount of time. It's how much can we do of all the things we want to do and put them together in this realistic first cut, really this phase one. So the minimal viable product is actually a value. It's not just a shortcut and a partial delivery. It's a full delivery of a phase. So it's the first step.
Yeah.
I mean, we see some great examples, stepping back and thinking specifically with utilities. I know with BG&E that they had a very big focus on just trying to increase awareness. They were trying to get participation in their programs and improve CSAT. So those were three primary things they were really trying to do. And you've got other organizations. PP&L made a very specific effort to resonate and be relevant with the customer, and they decided they were really going to make their effort around video. So they did personalized videos. If you want to learn why was my bill high last month, they built an engine that would actually create a video for you that shows has your name in it, has your exact usage in it, and explains exactly why it was probably different than you might have expected. So people don't like to read much anymore.
Yeah.
And they certainly don't want to spend a lot of time on a utility website reviewing details on their bill and trying to put together what this Greek formula is. They'd rather watch a video and have it explained to them. Hey, guess what? Temperatures are really high. Your usage went from this many blocks of energy to this many blocks of energy, which is pretty standard for everybody else, by the way.
Yeah.
And this is why your bill's high.
That's really cool. And we've definitely seen some other utilities that have started to embrace that personalized video technology. And it's great, as you mentioned, not only for increasing customer satisfaction, but also deflecting call center calls. I mean, when folks understand their bill, and this is one of the things that our research has shown us, is that customers really want to understand their usage better. And when they do that, they're less likely to be shocked by a high bill. They're less likely to say, oh, I have no idea why my bill is so high. I need to call in and have someone explain it to me. So the work that utilities do around video billing, interactive bills, things like that, to help customers really feel like they understand it and have a little bit more control is so valuable across the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. A couple other MVPs that I can think of are like Arizona Public Service, APS. They've made a lot of good strides towards analytics and customer insights. Some of the things I love that they've done is they've actually talked about challenging what you think, what kind of data you're allowed to have and use about customer data, because everyone is beginning to expect a different experience. We've talked about this in the past, you and I have, to where the consumer is a person. And it doesn't matter if that person's on a bank website or if that person is on a Amazon website or if they're on a utility or insurance company, they expect the same kind of experience. The rules and requirements and compliances and regulations for utilities on what they can do with customer data are different.
Yeah.
So, but they're changing. And that's what I love about what APS has been doing, about really challenging, what can we do with that data? And still, not risk the customer's data, mind you, but and definitely staying within compliance, but also making sure that, going back to the MVP, there's also minimum viable data. What's the minimum amount of data that we really need to satisfy our goal? We don't necessarily need their social security number or any financial information or anything that's personal, that's high risk, but we might just want to simply know location of where they're at or some other geo type of data.
And we definitely see a lot of utilities using geodata for some of their targeting. APS is actually a great example. We featured them on a webinar fairly recently, and they spoke about their efforts to segment, and just kind of a couple of highlights from that. One, they're very expansive in terms of the kind of data that they're looking for, in terms of being able to figure out who Ron is versus who KC is. And so they start with that in mind and then figure out where they can go get the data, rather than looking at it and saying, okay, well, this is the data we have. I guess that only tells us so much. And they've been really creative in terms of sourcing of data and applying it. And the second highlight from that discussion was really that, to your point, it's no longer about mass segments, right? Our demographics may be similar, but we are different people. We buy differently. We have, different needs in terms of our energy. And so they're really focusing on being able to communicate to me in the way that I prefer and to you in the way that you prefer, rather than just kind of broad brush segments. So it really is, as far as utilities go, there are a number of other industries that are kind of ahead in terms of customer segmentation and that personalization in that segment of one. But man, Arizona Public Service is doing a great job with that, and they're getting really close to it.
So. I agree with that. I think the last one I would probably reference on the MVP side would be Dominion. A client of ours, we do a lot of work with them. Fantastic organization. They're drafting some great visions as to what they want to do, but they did a good job with MVP. I'd say last year, very highly focused on their social play. Mm-hmm. And they put together a strategy with four different programs that they really wanted to focus on, between helping the customer, green, being able to be more efficient and reliable. So they were really good about crafting their messaging around those four different categories.
Yeah.
And they've done a great job of rolling that out and gathering insights from it. Right now, what we're working on right now is more around the web platform, to where they're actually building a content management platform, and something that's going to be able to give more analytics and provide more value. People want to be understood. They want relevant information. They want information. They want to be able to select how you talk to them, right? So the preference management center is being built in, and all these kind of things that people want. They're beginning to embrace those slowly. But it's an MVP. It's not that they only did part of a web and part of a social engagement. They did the whole part of the social, and now they're doing the whole part of the web, but they have a bigger grander scheme.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got your minimum viable product. Where do you go from there?
Yeah. Well, so after the MVP, definitely, and this kind of happens before, but it really happens even more after. Once you define what that is, you really need to step back and roadmap, and do a roadmap, if you will. So of the data that you're going to need. Again, we talk about the MVD, the minimum viable data to satisfy the MVP, and also the systems you're going to need, the resources, people. What are the integration points going to be now that you define what you're going to do? You're going to be gathering maybe weather data from over here. Maybe you want some financial data you might want some operational data from the grid. I mean, there's all kinds of things you might need, and it's so road mapping what those things are, understanding where that's going to be, what's going to be a reasonable time frame to get that done, what's the cost going to be, what is the people requirement going to be, and what are the asks I'm going to have to go and say, here's the data I need to get across the firewall so that we can be successful, so you can get that ball rolling. So that'd be the next step, and I'd call it a 4-step plan, and I'd say the 4th step would be definitely to start walking and running, because the crawling is really the first, what we talked about on that MVP side. That's when you're really just crawling, you're just getting going, you're trying to be realistic. What's the truth of the situation? We're all excited, we finally got approval of doing something, and now what? Right? So you've crawled, and you put that together, you got a plan, and after that, you've got that rolling, you've got the MVP out, everyone's happy. Now it's walk, run, fly. And it's, you're not going to be able to boil the ocean. The utilities are big organizations, they're big organizations. We work with a lot of enterprises as well, where sometimes this is usually a multi-year effort to get a really good customer experience put in place. But it's possible.
That's great. Well, I think that very much fits with, what we see in terms of best practice and laying that strategy out and doing it in a stepwise fashion. Among other things, we're seeing an increased number of utilities offering preference portals for their customers. And so usually that will roll out with kind of a minimum functionality, right? So it might be around outage alerts, and it might just be for email. And so over time, they add in billing alerts, and they add in phone, and they add in text. So they're adding in additional channels and additional options for the customers to be able to sign up for these kinds of alerts.
No, that's awesome. That's great. Well, I've kind of teed you up, if you think about it, because as I laid this out about having a strategy and having a vision and really getting those insights from you is step one. So Tell me a little bit more about the insights you guys gather. I mean,
Absolutely.
I know that's what you do with utilities.
Yeah. Well, so, I like to start with the customer, because really that's where it should start for all of us. They're ultimately the ones that are buying our product, whether it's kilowatt hours or whether it's software or services or research or whatever. And so we actually just completed a residential consumer survey, 1,500 plus consumers across North America. And a couple of things that we found that came out of that survey that I think are interesting and relevant to the topic at hand today. The first is that overall satisfaction with utilities has been climbing over the past 4 or 5 years. It plateaued a little bit between last year and this year, but still a definite strong growth. So kudos to the utilities for that. We dug in a little bit deeper in terms of what's actually driving customer satisfaction and what impacts customer experience. And what's interesting there is when you ask people in isolation, and take a guess, what do you think the number one thing is that people say drives their satisfaction with their utility experience? Not to put you on the spot.
I think that's pretty easy. I think it would be easy. I think it would be cost.
Yep, that's exactly right. So overwhelmingly, people say it's the amount that I pay drives my satisfaction with my utility.
But you know what's interesting about that is I don't know a single utility whose cost has come down over the last 5 years.
Well, so here's the next layer in that, right? So we dug in and said, okay, over the last 12 months, what has most positively impacted your experience and your satisfaction with your utility? Well, guess what? Price comes way down. It's still number one, but not by much. And so some of the things that have popped up in terms of positive satisfaction drivers, things like ease of paying the bill, ease of understanding the bill. And then we flipped that question around and said, okay, over the last 12 months, what's most negatively impacted your experience with your utility? Again, price comes way down. Still very significant. It never goes away. But things like ease of paying and understanding the bill, those actually go down against what they would if you ask people in isolation. And so our takeaway from that really is that utilities have done a really nice job in the billing space.
Absolutely.
In making it easier for customers and really improving the customer experience. So great to see there. The one thing that pops up in terms of negative satisfaction driver is outage communications. And so that's certainly part of the whole technology package in terms of how you communicate with customers during an outage. Right. And we can certainly get into that if we need to, but that's the one thing that really kind of popped up as it has more significantly impacted than customers say in isolation. The other thing that was really interesting that came out of the study is the expectations around mobile. And we talked to a lot of utilities around the country that are making an increased push on self-service. Primarily for cost savings reasons. It's cheaper to put someone in an IVR online than it is to have a call center rep take that call. We've talked to some folks outside the industry, and I'd love to get your take on this, that it's where customers are now. So it's not just a cost savings, but it's also a customer engagement tool, self-service. Does that echo your findings as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
I would say the same.
So looking at customer interest, basically across the board in every age cohort, from last year to this year, there's been about a 10% bump in interest in mobile functionality. That's pretty strong year-on-year growth. And even for seniors, folks in the 65 plus age cohort, it's near 50% for most mobile functionality that they're looking for their utility to provide.
65 plus?
Yeah.
50%?
Yeah.
That's shocking.
So there's a really strong demand for mobile self-service functionality. When you actually start breaking it down and disaggregating, the younger consumers are more likely to want mobile functionality, as you might expect. They're more likely to want things like account management, view pay bill, things like that. As you go to the older cohorts, things like outage reporting, outage status, that becomes more important. And so our takeaway there is, one, you want to, build that billing and account functionality first, and then over time layer in the outage stuff. A lot of utilities have taken the opposite tack. So if you're just starting with mobile or you're doing a refresh, start with the things that, your customers or your younger customers who are going to engage with that channel are looking for, which is the billing and account management stuff.
That's great.
So, the other things that may be useful here to share, looking across the industry at what folks are actually offering in terms of self-service functionality, we've seen definite growth in billing, in outage, self-service offerings. So that's nice to see. It's still a little bit behind where the consumer demand is. So there's definitely opportunity for folks to grow. We talked a little bit about preference portals earlier. About 2/3 of utilities offer a preference portal currently. Most of them allow you to manage bill alerts through email. About 50% are offering text, and about 2/3 of them are offering some sort of outage communication. So they're definitely, using web technology. There's definitely a lot of functionality kind of coming online. We're seeing a lot of growth in that space for utilities, and that's good because customers are demanding it.
Yep. They're demanding that same experience with everybody, right? They don't care if you're a utility.
Absolutely.
Yep. Wants to do the same thing.
Absolutely. Yep. The expectations are the same. And you know what? It's Domino's that's driving it. It's FedEx that's driving it. It's, Delta that's driving it. It's all these other companies that are doing great things with customer experience and some innovative things with customer experience. And you don't get a pass just because you're a utility.
But the upside, there's an upside there, right? And the fact is, with that upside, that means there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of knowledge already gained.
Absolutely.
The tooling prices have come way down. They've gotten so powerful, but they've actually come way down and much easier to use than they would have been in the past. I mean, to see marketing technology platforms, communication platforms now using big data to be able to go off and to personalize information and make your experience positive. Those kind of tools were ridiculously expensive and customized before, but now they're off the shelf, and at least the basic tool parts are. There's a lot of work to do to make them work.
Well, so you spoke earlier about how Arke works with a bunch of different sectors. What sort of things are you seeing with some of your other sector clients that they're doing that your utility clients aren't doing that maybe they should be doing?
Well, that's a great question. It's actually one that I just recently did some study on myself. One of our utility clients reached out and wanted to have some comparisons for them to take to their teams to get more support for some of their efforts they're doing. And they came to us and said, show us some examples of some utilities or even other companies in enterprise that you're working with, excuse me, that are actually using targeted content to be able to address PR and be able to support maybe some initiatives that the utility was going to be facing. Mm-hmm. So I went out and said, that'll be easy. Yeah, not so much. Have a lot of good contacts in the utility space and enterprise, obviously, and reached out to many of them. And I found a lot of people doing bits and pieces, but there were so many siloed opportunities or examples that I came across for what this was doing. But to step back and look at the enterprise side, it was a lot easier. Even though they weren't necessarily doing it for PR, it's the same exact process. It doesn't matter. When you're talking about using a digital platform to serve up targeted content to achieve a result. It doesn't matter if you're doing PR or if you're selling shoes.
Yeah,
it's the same exact effort, right? So it's like, let's just say you're a utility and you are going to run a pipeline. You've got a new pipeline. Let's say it's Keystone Pipeline, right? And you're running pipeline across the country. You're tearing up yards, and there's going to be some groups out there that are going to tell you that you're destroying the environment, that you're causing traffic problems, that you're causing displeasure amongst the homeowners that are going to be affected. There's a lot of negative things you could say. There is a flip side story they can talk about: job creation, energy reliability, cost control of energy. There's another story that could be told. Right. So with all that being said and done, stepping back and thinking about how, like, some of our enterprise clients, for example, are they're buying a list of contacts, email addresses that it might be in a zip code. They're going to send out an email marketing campaign through a tool like maybe like Sitecore, one of the powerful content management systems that can track the analytics behind even an email, and build up maybe a microsite to where you buy the list, you send out the email to everybody in that zip code. They click on the thing to go find out what's going to happen, and they learn the other side of the story about what's happening. Then they click on another one and end up on your website. You get more information. Then they like you on Facebook and they start following you. There's a whole flow of things you can do. The same exact process can happen we've got a sale on tennis shoes, and we bought a list from USTA and all the tennis players. So you with that, you come to our microsite, you like the shoe, you buy it, you join our news list, you like us, it moves on. It doesn't matter.
So I've got a great example for you from the utility space where someone's actually doing that. I spoke earlier about how consumers are saying outage communications is the one area that utilities are really lacking in terms of customer satisfaction. Well, We Energies they're actually one of our award winners. We'll be announcing it at EMAX, our conference coming up in the next 2 weeks here.
Right.
And they built a whole bunch of online tools for outage communications and outage map and things of that sort. And what they did is they actually did targeted Google ads so that when an outage occurred, they were geo-targeting these ads to drive people who were saying We Energies outage back to their site where it had all of the outage communication tools to say, hey, this stuff is there. And if you actually looked at what they had done, they not only had the AdWords that they had bought, but they did some significant search engine optimization. So the whole first page was We Energies stuff. So they did a really nice job of addressing that one very specific pain point and using some of that targeting that you're talking about to say, hey, this is something that's affecting these people right now. Let's make sure that we're getting them the tools that we've developed to help them in the moment that they need that.
That's terrific. And if anybody's out there from We Energy today, just be aware that Casey's going to have me introduced to you, I think, because I want to find out more about that. That's a great case study. That's really nice to see.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
But there's a lot of those things happening. So it's like, and I'd say one of the biggest differences between the enterprise and the utility space on what they're doing differently is going back to the sensitivity of the data, the contact information, being able to actually share. Enterprises got less rules, right? They're able to run a little bit more freely, even though there's still rules. I mean, we've seen with Target, Target.com, we've seen things happen that there's some new rules coming, and there's some standard ethical rules that are already in place. So I think the utilities are a little bit slower to take risks. Even when it is within the regulation compliance, they still often don't want to press that envelope very much.
Yeah.
So the pace of movement is a lot slower.
Yeah.
For sure.
So flipping that on its head, what's not working?
I'd say that's the biggest thing is really the silos of data are probably the other, probably even the bigger one. And we've worked with a lot of different companies and addressed these kind of challenges like Delta Airlines and several other big organizations that have big data, and they have siloed walls to where you might only get a refresh data feed every 24 hours, but if you want to provide real-time information to your customers, you might want that every 30-minute update about, how many of these seats are left or how many of these are left.
Well, we just heard a great example of Delta introducing a new omni-channel initiative where they will actually reconfigure the phone tree when you call in if you've recently received a notification about a flight.
Okay.
Are you calling about the notification we just sent you?
Yeah, that's
great. So they get you directly there. And we've been talking with utilities. Utilities definitely would like to do that. We're not aware of anyone that's doing that yet, but I think that's a good example of, where you can use that data and tie those kind of disparate streams together to create an experience that's more seamless for customers.
Right. And I can see like the opportunity, because the amount of data and the amount of knowledge that utilities have about their customers is amazing. It's intense. Everything from the usage that they're doing all the way through to even the substations around them and how efficient they are.
Absolutely.
And the transformers. And there's all this operational data that could even be leveraged into the non-operational data and be able to provide some amazing insights for the customers. I don't think they're ready for it yet. In most cases, there's a lot of information there that most people 80% of people don't even ever program their thermostat on their house.
Right.
So to actually give them a smart meter or even an app that's going to tell them a lot more information about their energy is just probably a little unnecessary at this point. It's coming.
Yeah, and I always start with the customer, right? So what do they want?
Right.
And one of the other things that we looked at with our consumer survey this year was, what are the decision criteria, right? So when you're making a decision as a consumer, what's most important to you? Well, number one is
cost.
There you go. Yeah. So cost is number one for sure. But then you get into convenience and comfort are number 2 and 3. Environmental is actually the last one on the list of the attributes that we tested. It's a little bit higher for the 18 to 34 age cohort, but not much. So, thinking about, okay, you've got this data. What is it that a consumer wants out of it? They want you to make their life more convenient. They want you to make them more comfortable. You don't necessarily do that by exposing all the data. So you've got to be thinking about what is it that the customer really wants and needs. How can you use the data that you have and the technology platforms that you have to actually deliver that to them?
Well, from your point of view, what would you see as being the most critical thing for utility to achieve that holy grail customer experience?
Well, I mean, I think I'd echo what you said to set this up, that having a strategy is really critical. Understanding why you want to do something before actually going out and doing it not only helps you build the thing better, but also helps you better assess at the end of the day whether you've done what you set out to do. One of the tools that we've seen as really effective for utilities to do this is customer journey mapping, or even taking it to the next step, which is customer journey blueprinting, which starts to layer in some of those processes and systems that you talked about. But the nice thing about customer journey mapping, and I think our latest data shows somewhere around 40% of utilities are using those, at least in some cases, not necessarily across all of the customer experiences. But one, it helps put you in the frame of mind of the customer, because you're really trying to think about what is the customer's experience with us or with trying to solve a certain problem. Two, it allows you to engage stakeholders across the organization, so you can help break down some of those silos that you spoke about and build that common vision of what is the kind of customer experience that we want to provide and what's my particular personal role or my department's role in delivering that customer experience. And then third, it also helps you troubleshoot. So if you layer data in, as you should be doing when you're journey mapping, you can determine at what point in your customer's journey are they running into barriers that are causing frustration, that are causing them to drop out of a process or zero out of a phone tree, for example, and hit a CSR, or that's causing dissatisfaction. That data can really help you zero in on, okay, we're pretty good on these 5 parts here. This one thing we're not doing well, and you can go in there and you can fix it, and you don't have to think about, oh, we've got to rebuild this whole thing, because the whole thing's not broken. Could probably be improved, but this one thing is broken. Let's go fix that. Yep.
The minimum viable piece.
Precisely.
I think we've MV'd out, so that's good.
Yeah. Good. Well, I guess this is probably the close of the conversation. I'd love to get some questions that our audience has for us. Anything? I don't have anything else that I'd say to close it out. I think it's the strategy piece. Anything else from your end to close the conversation?
I think it's and I love seeing it. Like you mentioned it. We both talked about APS, and you mentioned how progressive you see them with their data and their analytics. And we're talking to them about some machine learning. They're really interested about applying technology to their data, and what more can we do to gather those insights to have a better experience for our customer, and to be able to serve them better, save money. Everything's great, but the triangulation of data is such an important thing that I still see missing for most utilities. They might have a great social play and a great web presence, video, and everything else, but bringing all that data together and being able to know more, the whole law of synergy where 1 + 1 = 3. That's where I really get excited when I see people starting to do those kind of things. So I definitely want to go talk to We Energies too. So
that's great. We'll connect you with them at EMAX.
That's fantastic. Yes, we'll be there.
Great.
Very happy to be there. So I guess we'll step back and see if we have any questions.
All right, guys. So we do have a few. The first question is, do you find there's resistance from customers in engaging with utilities companies, or do you feel like customers are really just excited about engaging with brands, period?
I'll let you take that.
All right. Well, so customer engagement has been something that utilities have been trying intentionally to do for past couple of years, at least in a more significant way than they have. For me, and this is both kind of my lens through which I view the world, but also our data backs this up, you've got to provide a value proposition. I mean, we touched on that earlier. If all you're doing is saying, look how much data we have here, you'll get some people who are the data geeks and they'll get into that. They'll love it. They'll engage with it. But that's not most consumers. So, in terms of engagement and in terms of building a customer experience, my recommendation would be to really understand who your customers are. And, as we've touched on, they may have very different needs depending on, their demographics, depending on their psychographics, all sorts of things. That's the one challenge with utilities, right, is that you have an obligation to serve everyone. You can't just pick and choose your customers, but understand your customers and then determine what's going to add value to them and build that. And if you are adding value to their lives, people will engage. If they don't see the value proposition, it's going to be a really long road to hoe.
I'd like to tag on to that question. Along those same lines, what utility do you see? You could list more if you know, but it may be some of the best experiences with low income, that they're dealing with low income and really trying to help solve the brand of the utility and really do the right thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. The utility that I'd point to, and unfortunately they're not far along in this journey enough that they have results, but is Entergy. And the thing that's really impressed me about how they've approached this low income question is, of course, for Entergy in New Orleans, they've got a very significant portion of their customer base is low income. And they were seeing some financial challenges as a company because of that. And they started looking at it and said, the way that we've set up our policies and our processes, it's really for the middle class or upper class consumer. It actively hurts the low income consumer. And so they're going back and they're reimagining how they set up that customer experience for low income consumers in a way that acknowledges and responds to the challenges that those consumers have in their day-to-day lives, in making sure that the lights stay on, that they've got a meal on the table, all of that good stuff. So I'm just incredibly impressed by the amount of customer insight that has gone into that effort, the executive support to say, hey, we really have to walk a mile in our customers' shoes and figure out how we as a company respond to that. Right. So I would definitely point to them as a great example of someone that's going down the right road with that.
It's great to hear one of our partners we work with on that same side of strategy would point out Entergy as well. Obviously, they're in an area that has a big requirement and need for that kind of service as well. So.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yes. So another question that we got was, are the aspirations for a great customer experience different for a regulated industry versus a deregulated or unregulated industry?
Take a first stab at it, and you can correct me after I'm done.
Sounds good.
The expectations are the same as people. They're still humans. The utilities need to embrace is different, obviously. But when you're in a competitive market, then it's got to be different. But the expectations of the customers are the same, whether you're regulated or not. Matter of fact, in many cases, I'd say they're even higher if you're in a regulated market, because often people feel trapped because they feel like they're being monopolized. So the level of effort to get them to think that you really do care is different, because they can't go anywhere regardless as to what you do. Right. But utilities are really beginning. A lot of utilities are understanding the fact that we may be regulated now, but that may not be the case forever. And just because that is the case, it doesn't mean that there's not competition coming now anyway, with solar fields that are out there and distributed generation and so many different ways that companies that are Tesla, people start to pop up with all kinds of different options for providing energy. So consumers care. I think utilities in a deregulated market care more, but that difference is getting smaller.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I mean, I think, from the customer standpoint, this idea that, hey, Domino's can tell me what happens with my order from the moment I call it in, through it going in the oven, through it going on the car, to the delivery person knocking on my door. Why can you not tell me where your field crews are and when my power is going to go back on? I mean, the expectations from customers absolutely are the same, regardless of the regulatory environment. And I think you touched on the point that in terms of the corporate strategy, utilities in a regulated environment may have different drivers for wanting to care about customer experience. We've seen some really good research from British Telecom looking at some customer experience metrics, including Net Easy Score, which is essentially like ease of use analog to Net Promoter Score. And they found that it's very highly correlated to reduced churn and increased spend. So for them, as a telecom in a competitive environment, customer experience is critical for them to grow their business. metrics in a utility standpoint, as you point out, are different, but things are changing, right? There's this threat of substitution. And in fact, Moody's within the last week just released a report that said, once battery storage comes down in price, that it's going to significantly impact the financial performance of utilities. A more nuanced way of saying what I've said for a while, which is when storage gets cheap, it's game over for the traditional utility. So you've got to really be building that customer experience so people want to stay with you, so that they're looking to you as the provider of storage technologies, distributed generation technologies, of energy. And you got to start now, because if others start getting in there, it may be too late to capture at least the compelling customers out of that group. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think this will be our last question, but how do you prioritize the improvements we want to make on behalf of our customer experience? You want to take that?
You start, I'll finish.
Okay.
I'll correct you.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you're welcome to correct me. I would go back again to this idea of customer journey mapping. And if you're not familiar with the concept, I'll briefly outline it, but there's lots of good guides online that you can go check out. The idea is looking from a customer standpoint when they want to solve a problem. What does each step of the way look like? And it may or may not involve a touch point with your company. So you want to be thinking about other things that impact their journey as well. And layer in data that helps you understand things like customer satisfaction with touch points. So transactional surveys are really useful in that. Look at things like ease of use. So for example, if someone's calling in to report a power outage, how easy is it for them to do that via your IVR? And you can layer in both post-transactional stuff and even looking at some of the data feed that's coming. How many times does someone zero out to report an outage? So you can take a more quantitative approach to that. And that'll really help guide you to those areas where you need to improve your customer experience. And you can prioritize, you can build that minimum viable product, and then the subsequent roadmap based on those areas that through this discovery process of journey mapping, you can figure out the kind of the pain points, if you will.
No, very well said. I can't correct that.
All right, good.
So is that our last question?
Great.
I think we're a wrap here. Thank you everybody for joining. I think you'll be able to find this video on YouTube with Arke. So be sure and look there and come find us. And also, I'll be seeing you, KC, at EMAX next week or week after, isn't it?
Week after, yes. It'll be October 12th through 14th. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.